Thank you, Robert. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. It's a privilege to be here. Not my first time in Budapest. Actually, I've been here quite a number of times. And it's always a pleasure to come back, and the visits are always too short. But they're great fun, and the hospitality is wonderful. So it's very nice to be here. Thank you for the invitation. And I have a few comments to add to the discussion or to the debate that we're having here today under this heading of energy law in a time of competing policy priorities. My approach is very different from that of the learned judge who's gone through a number of important cases. Instead, I really want to just have a look at what seem to me to be maybe three questions and three areas that are based on those. Okay, good. Thank you. Good. I hope you can hear me all right. Good, good. I'm sure you can see me, but the hearing is probably more important than the seeing. All right. Yes, three areas, and then I'm going to stop. So what I want to do is highlight why it is that at the moment, when you're dealing with energy law as a practitioner or as a teacher, there are challenges around these competing policy priorities. Until quite recently, we were all able to say the dominant direction is sustainability or climate change mitigation. For a number of years, that has been the overwhelming priority. That period has come to an end, and we now have a more complex environment, as you've been hearing from some of the introductory remarks so far. Not just a more complex environment in Hungary, but a more complex environment in Europe and internationally. So the three questions, I think, are important to consider, and I'll make some comments on them in a moment. Firstly, how to make energy law respond to the climate change problem and sustainability more widely. That really has become much more complex as governments have tried to take action to deal with climate change. Just yesterday I was reading about how one learned gentleman was writing in the Financial Times was saying, well, we've really got to keep in mind the importance of biodiversity in relation to climate change. When you establish these data centers, and indeed when you establish wind farms, you also take up a lot more land space than you would if you were building a conventional energy structure. So infrastructure now is taking up a lot of what can be valuable land space for farming and also for environmental purposes. So that we're understanding better. It's a source of many challenges for governments. So that's really one question. It's not particularly surprising to you, not particularly new, the climate change priority. But the second one is a little bit less familiar, and it does relate to the data center question, but in a slightly different way. So far, I think everybody's been quite nice in the way that they've dealt with it. I'm going to perhaps take a slightly different perspective on that. How to organize energy law to facilitate growth among competing states, especially blocks, regional blocks with fundamentally different values. Now, sometimes people talk about geopolitics. One of my colleagues, or former colleagues, pointed out to me that geopolitics, it means different things to different people. I thought that was quite perceptive. She was a political scientist, and I think it was a very good thing to say, because if you look at the media, that word comes up again and again and again, and really, I'm afraid, it's very mushy conceptually. That's how I would prefer to frame it in terms of a question. Third question, and then I'll come back to that one in a moment. How to ensure the energy law tries to attain fairness and to secure affordability and access. Remember that Sustainable Development Goal number 7, energy access, hasn't gone away. It remains an enormous problem. I'm sure it must be a problem for some people here in Hungary. For a long time, people thought of it in terms of a problem for the global south. Sub-Saharan Africa, you don't need to go that far away. In many parts of Europe, there are people who have real problems getting access to energy, and other people who could get access to energy, but they can't afford it. So it's very much our problem. So 1, 2, 3, those seem to me to be the big questions that are facing national energy systems at the moment. And even within Europe, where you have quite a lot of homogeneity from a legal point of view with European law, you've got an awful lot of diversity too at the national level, since, as you know, energy is a shared competence in European law. So let's look at these 3 challenges and identify some detail, give it some granularity, as somebody once said from a business school. So on the first point, national systems are increasingly treating climate change in a holistic way, as a whole, not just to address CO2 emission reductions in a vacuum. I think that's been a big mistake that certain people have made. It's either net zero or it's nothing. And that really is a slightly cartoon approach to the problem. If you abandon fossil fuels tomorrow and use only clean energy, everything will be fine. Well, it's not as simple as that. These slogans have proved to be both unconvincing and also unhelpful in terms of making detailed policies. Now, that's not my way of saying, either indirectly or implicitly, that somehow climate change is not the major problem. I think it is. It's a different way of looking at it. And it seems that building renewable energy requires access to very large tracts of land, I've just said that, which may be in use for farming or have environmental benefits. And choices have to be made in approaching this particular problem, which, to its credit, the COP meetings have understood in the last few of their annual meetings. But another point is that grid networks need to be expanded to permit more renewable energy. And there, the question is, how do you organize that? How do you organize your planning laws and your environmental laws to make this possible, and do so in a way that respects democracy? Or certainly for us, this is an issue. You can't just, in our kind of society, you can't just steamroller over the objections of other people, which are actually protected in many cases by planning law and environmental law that has been developed over decades. So they're very complex systems that are designed, unfortunately, to slow down infrastructure development. And that's a pretty major problem at the moment. The second question I wanted to comment on about how you organize energy law to facilitate growth among competing nation states and regional blocs. There's probably one key word here, and that is electrification. A key feature of the competition among states now, whether it's North America, Europe, or in the East, mainly China, is the speed with which they can electrify their economies to a new, higher level. And you see this in the discussion on data centers and the growing kinds of PPAs that are needed to secure regular supplies of energy, those essential agreements. From a teacher's point of view, or an educator's point of view, this is an important area since it's one where students can expect to see significant employability and career potential. I mean, this is, you may say, well, you may have a problem about that, but actually most of the students that I'm dealing with are postgraduate students. They're very, very keen to think, what do I do next? What's the job potential when I finish this degree, which they're often paying a significant fee to be doing. But in terms of organizing knowledge, you can't help students unless you focus on the unique features of the technology in each of the areas that feed into electricity supply. This makes teaching quite difficult if you've been educated, as most of us are, in a particular discipline. I'm not an engineer, for example. So when I try and understand wind or solar or nuclear or gas or some other kind of energy or a mixture, all of which is important in trying to understand, say, how a data center works, you do need to get beyond a purely legal expertise. And now I think when it comes to teaching the subject, my own view is that increasingly you have to get somebody into the room to explain a lot of the technology to the students, so that and that can apply not just to the students, in the sense we're all students on this. You need somebody to be able to explain, this is the technology. And without that understanding, you can't understand why the legal instruments are the way they are. So it seems to me this is now something that you have to do in every one of these areas, not just, say, nuclear, where physics is so important. It applies as much to hydrogen and so on. So you also need to explain tech. Secondly, the players, because the players are often very different. Or if you're a political scientist, they talk about the actors, the kinds of parties that invest, the kinds of parties that operate, say, a data center, the ones that are involved in the supply chain. They're all rather different. And further, I think you need to explain not only the transactional aspect, all these different power purchase contracts, PPAs I called them, but in addition to that, and the way that they influence financing, but also the propensity of most of these kinds of energy to generate disputes. It's not, in the old days, people used to say, once we get into the clean energy era, we're not going to have disputes in the way we've had, or arbitrations in the way we've seen with the nasty oil and gas industry. That was the sort of slightly naive view. and a mischaracterization of the oil and gas industry, but a big mischaracterization of clean energy. Because what we've seen, and this is not just a comment on those famous cases involving Spain, what we see generally, not just treaty cases, but commercial cases between parties in the supply chain are disputes, 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 disputes. Very, very, very common. This is a massive growth area. I know this because I've talked to in-house counsel in a number of firms, and it takes up a lot of their time. It's a nuisance, but it's a reality. And partly, you can understand that if you realize that one of the things that they've been doing in the clean energy industry is that they've been innovating very fast. They've been introducing new technology, and they haven't tried it very, very much. They've introduced it, and they thought, okay, let's go with this. Normally, they might say, let's take our time and try it, test it, and then we'll apply it. But everybody's in a hurry, and they've been in such bigger windmills, bigger blades. Well, when something goes wrong, how do you deal with it? You look at your supply chain. Oh, we didn't notice things were going to be short of various essential things, and so on. This has gone on. We have a dispute. Who's to blame? Who's got the liability here? Is it my fault or is it your fault? I don't want it to be my fault. It's your fault, and so on. And these disputes are very, very common, so I don't think you can underestimate the commercial disputes that we're now seeing right across the board with every kind of clean energy. So generally speaking, I think you now need to explain in energy law how this body of economic law interacts with sustainability and with security or system resilience considerations, since the market will not be able to deal adequately with the challenges. That's just the way things are. You're going to need some kind of government intervention, some underwriting by government of some of these systems. The importance of that you can see from the recent, very important Spanish electricity outage, where in a matter of seconds, nearly 60% of the country's electricity vanished, just like that, and from the grid. This kind of system, lack of resilience, is unfortunately not just a Spanish problem. The key thing is it's something which can happen in a lot of different places because we're entering a new, potentially very unstable system situation. Again, this is an area in which you will get a lot of disputes, for sure. Okay, the last question I'm going to deal with as a source of problems for energy law is the one that I raised at the start concerning affordability and energy access. Now, some people have emphasized, some people in the EFELA as well, who have emphasized the importance of energy justice and the need to tackle these issues. And they're quite right to do that with that. There's been a lot of research on this. They point out that the values that underpin any energy law regime include the need to have a fair system and to respond to energy access, and at least try and expand energy access. More specifically, it's an area where you will have subsidies, aids, state aids, support mechanisms that are abundant, and they will distort the market, of course, but they do assure that enough people will buy in to that market in the first place and remain positive about it. Of course, a problem lies in the way in which justice is defined. One comment here on the international scene I would say this is just a comment. Since I used to have, and still do have to some extent, students from the Global South, there's been a big decline in international aid budgets. I don't know if you've, I mean, spectacularly, you've seen it with the USAID recently, but it's a sign of how countries have become more inward-looking and much less concerned with the international scene. And that does have implications for how we understand energy access. So those are the three issues that I wanted to emphasize that present challenges in the way we look at energy law. Basically, they are versions of the familiar so-called energy trilemma. As a way of understanding the competition among priorities that policymakers and ultimately lawyers have to deal with it, and also how academic teachers have to think about the different priorities. For me, the overall objective remains the climate change mitigation objective. However, even if progress on achieving that has been very disappointing to date, but the promise of electrification and new low-carbon technologies offers the teacher of energy law a program of issues that allows us to focus on transactions, disputes, planning, environmental law, competition law, as well as liability issues, privacy, intellectual property issues, and rights to those, and how these all interact. And in that sense, it's a good basis for new research for EFELA members, and also for equipping our students to go out there and have fulfilling careers. So in a sense, you could say that would be the new energy map, with all those dimensions to it. So if anything, if there's a message from all of that, stop thinking in terms of silos, because the real world is definitely not working in that way anymore. Okay, now I don't know if I've spoken too long, I hope, but anyway, I'm going to finish on that note, and that's me, and I know that Filippo Donati has got many more interesting ideas that he wants to share with you, so I'm going to stop at that note and say thank you very much for the invitation once again. Thank you, Robert. Thank you to the university.